session. We're now ready to go on with the public portion of our meeting. We had no public correspondence this week. President's report, I want to first of all remember former board member who died last week, Roger Nelson, who was a longtime Glenridge resident. He died in his 80s and he moved here at the age of 5. He graduated Glenridge High School. He was a member of the Board of Education. He was a member of the Town Council. He was a founding member of the Freeman Gardens Board. He is in our Athletic Hall of Fame, I believe, for track and field, I think. He was just, I think, if there was a volunteer job in Glenridge that he didn't hold, I don't know why. He was just a consummate volunteer, a consummate public servant, and a really wonderful gentleman. His daughter, Karen Pennington, has been active in the Home and School and Scholarship Committee, so please remember the Nelson family in your thoughts. Also, we have 2 retirements, Yvonne Booknight and Louis Melcher. I want to draw your attention to that. Yvonne has been with us for quite a long time.
Since 2004?
Since 2004, and has touched many students' lives. Louis, a little bit less time, but also has touched many people here at the high school. So I just want to express appreciation to both of them for their service to the board. And that's the President's report. Sure.
Thank you. I have a few items for tonight, just along the lines that Betsy just mentioned, the 2 retirements. I want to wish him the best. Yvonne has been here since 2004. And I think one of the most important aspects we do as educators is teach children to read. She is the reading specialist at Linden, so her influence over the students has just been a huge impact in their lives. And it's not just the children, she's the specialist, so she's working with the staff very closely to make sure that they're using the best strategies possible when they're noticing struggling readers in their classrooms, that she's helping those teachers be effective with those struggling readers. And I know she's a staff leader in that building. She's involved, I believe she's a program leader this year down there at Linden. So her influence is in the classroom, outside the classroom, with working with the staff, and just all the operations that happen at Linden. Louis has been here 2.5 years. Just a great display of passion for education with Louis. He's shown unbelievable support for the students, for the staff, for the school. He's always around at every school event, here extremely early in the morning till late in the evening. He's just been a big commitment to this school. And we all know his love of music, and he's shared that with the students at all times, whether it's playing with the band, playing music as people enter plays or chorus concerts, playing after school with students, playing in the cafeteria. He's just been a big part of this community, this high school community, for the last 2.5 years. And I want to wish him the best as he goes into his retirement. As we start looking at that, though, we do have to plan his replacement. And I just want to give the board members and the audience members an outline of how we're going to proceed forward. First thing, we're going to end up posting the opening tomorrow. And by law, we have to post for 10 days. And we're going to reach out to the newspapers, online websites, professional organizations. I'll contact other superintendents I'm close with, just to let them know where, if they have anyone who's exceptional, where they can find the online application. During those 10 days, I'll start reviewing resumes. It's almost like an informational period during those 10 days. I'll review applications. I'll get input from staff and parents during that time. It's going to be a pretty big process. We'll end up then having the first round of interviews, and there'll be group interviews that will include other administration on that first round, or narrow down our field a little bit. Second round will be more of an activities type interview, where we're going to have candidates do different things. It won't be just an interview. We'll have some group interviews with some parents and student groups. But we'll also ask them to perform some tasks to see what kind of skill set they have and how that aligns with our priorities as a school system. Then we'll probably narrow it down some more and have a third round of interviews with the central administration. And we'll do some fact finding, and from there I'll make a recommendation to the Board of Ed. I'm hoping to have this wrapped up and have someone named by the end of the school year. So if everything goes well for us. I want to talk a little bit. We did meet the administration with the Glen Ridge Police Department. The chief was there along with 3 other officers. So we had a probably good hour discussion about school security and safety, different protocols and procedures. We've worked closely with them. We're kind of unique as a school district. Whenever, typically, I'd say about 80% of the time when we have emergency drills, the Glen Ridge Police Department is involved. Our state code is that they should be involved at least once during the school year in each building. So we're unique that we have them involved so much throughout the entire school year in every building. They've made some recommendations. At this point, the Glen Ridge Police is what we call hardening the schools, of really looking at the security. I think a lot of the superintendents are looking for a balance between hardening the school and assaulting the school, really addressing those students who are not connecting within the school community or having emotional issues and how we can best address them. So we're looking at this as a balanced approach to deal with security issues. In tonight's budget, we do have some improvements for security upgrades in there, but we also have improvements to deal with student issues. So I think that's important as in order to move forward effectively, we need to address both components. And speaking of tonight's budget, behind you, I'm going to give you a presentation. So in March, we did a preliminary budget, and at that time, one of the things I informed everyone was we didn't have our health benefit numbers, and that's what you'll see is one of our driving factors of creating the budget. We did an estimate of what our numbers would look like. Hopefully they come under that estimate, or at least at that estimate. Well, a couple days after the preliminary budget, those numbers came in and they were way above our estimate. So we went back to our insurance broker and said, you got to do better than this. The second estimate came in a little bit higher than what we projected. And at that time, then we sent it to other insurance carriers. They have an opportunity to bid, and one of the insurance carriers then put in a bid of what we projected it to be. So what's a nice component of this, if you were here during that preliminary budget, these numbers haven't changed. And that's a good factor. The factor that still bothers us, and something that we're going to be looking at as a board, is that our insurance costs are still relatively high, and we need to address that. All right, so when we start looking at the budget, we're really looking at everything that we need to make this school successful. And when we start looking at success, we start looking at our graduates and what have they been able to do as they're leaving the school. Have we prepared them? Have the standard measures of success, are we seeing them achieve those standards? And if you look at our numbers, it's pretty impressive. When we have 98% of our students graduate. Last year, 94% of the class of 2017 went on to a four-year college or university. Our AP numbers are increasing immensely. We have national merit scholars, advanced placement scholars. competitions our students are entering, whether it's New York Times, Model UN, they're being recognized for their performance. We have a very strong music and marching band program. The marching band has been in the top 3 nationally in their competitions for the last 2 years. And we've been recognized by a number of outside organizations, including College Board, Washington Post, U.S. News, and different publications at a state level. So we're seeing success, and this budget is all designed for these things to happen, to make our students reach their potential. So when we start looking at the budget, it's really a year-long process. After it's hopefully approved tonight by the board, we start looking at what's going to happen down the road. The start of next school year, I start meeting with the finance committee. I'm talking to the administration, those initial steps to develop it. By December, the schools and the departments are handing in their budget. We're starting to get really a skeleton budget going. By March, we have our preliminary budget. Once we have that preliminary budget, sometimes we're still waiting on state aid numbers, sometimes we're waiting on health benefit numbers, so there could be adjustments. Last year we had an adjustment because of health cost issues. And then finally tonight, you see the final draft of our budget. The budget is really made up of 2 components. You have your revenue side and your expense side. When you start looking at your revenue, it's really what you would expect the big contributors. You have our local tax levy is the largest contributor by far, and our state aid. And when you start looking at the debt service is separate from our operating budget. That's the bond referendums we passed for the high school expansion and the one we passed in the March of 2017. So you'll start to see some increases. The budgeted fund balance, there's a 34% increase, and that's really money left over. If you look at the 2018-19 fund balance, that almost $2 million is money left over from the budget 2 years ago that we didn't spend. So that we have to wait for that fiscal year to end, and those numbers are finalized before we can put them in our previous year's budget. So that's where that money's coming from. And the rest is pretty self-explanatory. Tax, tuition, it's pre-K tuition, and we have a handful of our district students who pay tuition, some rents for using our buildings, unrestricted miscellaneous revenues, that's student activity fees and interest, correct? Yeah, unrestricted state aid, grants and entitlements, and debt service. And just to get a visual picture, which is disturbing to all taxpayers in New Jersey, the biggest component of our revenue, our income, is the local tax levy. You see a little bit of history. Again, looking at our tax levy and the state aid, the 2 biggest contributors to our revenue. I've mentioned this for 3 years now, and I'm sure John Michello mentioned it prior to me becoming superintendent. 2010-11 was a tough school year. That's when we lost all our state aid, $1.2 million. 8 years ago, $1.2 million we lost. We're starting to see an increase the last couple of years. We're at a little over 900,000, but we're still not where we were 10 years ago. And you think about the increasing costs and increasing enrollment in this district, that's a lot of tough financial decision making on the board and the BA and myself. So hopefully we'll start getting that funding that we should have. And when we talk about the funding that we should be getting, it's based on the School Funding Reform Act. The columns represent how much money we should be getting in aid. So when the state funding formula was constructed in 2009, we were supposed to get $1.2 million. That year, we got $1.2 million in aid. The second year, we were supposed to get $1.3 million. The state gave us $800,000. We were short $500,000, $500,000. So that light blue column represents what we got. The whole column represents what we should have got. So the dark blue is what was missing. The third year, we were missing everything. Zero funding from the state. The trend there that we're looking at is we're starting to see some increases in the last couple of years in our funding, but we're still not getting the aid we're supposed to get based on the funding formula. Our revenues must match our expenses, and when you start looking at expenses, these are the categories we're looking at. Instruction, those instruction costs basically are personnel and supplies, textbooks and so forth, which is running about a 2% increase, which is what our entire budget is at actually. Support services is everything associated with the school that doesn't fall under instruction. It's nurses, it's guidance, it's child study team, it's facilities. There's a lot of different components, libraries, technology. All those fall under support service. Capital expenditures, although it looked like it jumped a lot, the reason why it jumped a lot, since we had that $1.9 million in surplus from 2 years ago, we put a bunch of that money into the capital expenditures as in our capital reserve account. That account is basically a rainy day account. If we have anything go wrong, that's the account we need to hit if we have a one-time expense. A new roof, boiler, whatever it may be. So we want to make sure we use some of that excess funds and replenish our capital reserve fund. Grant and entitlements is the monies we're getting from grants. That's the same amount, the expense and revenue, and the debt service, as I mentioned, up 68%, which makes sense because the new bond referendum, that debt service is now included in next year's budget. And again, when you start looking at expenses, what you would think would be your two biggest factors: what's happening in the classroom, instruction, teachers, supplies, and the other components to make sure that the schools are operating, that all necessary services are your two biggest expenses. When you start looking at expenses and breaking it down a little bit more, these are our 7 biggest factor of our expenses. The regular programs, those are teachers and supplies, special education, teachers and supplies. The tuition number represents out-of-district costs to us for sending students out of district. School administration, it's not my salary. I am capping, not that high. School administration is superintendent costs, board costs, legal fee costs, accounting costs, and any supplies that are associated with those items. Facility, that's our custodial staff, our maintenance staff, supplies, cleaning supplies, maintenance contracts we have. And as I mentioned earlier, our employee benefits, our health costs, you can see what a big factor that is into our expenses. It's an important component. And lastly, our debt service, which I've spoken about a couple times. That's the service for our high school expansion and the new bond referendum. So when we have all these expenses, you're wondering, well, how efficient is Glen Ridge running their school system? Here's a cost breakdown of our school compared to either schools in the area or smaller schools similar to us. We don't have this year's number. The state hasn't released the 17-18 numbers yet, but historically, we're an efficient district. If you compare us to other districts that are similar to us. In that list, only Verona is below us. We're way below the state average. So it kind of shows you, you look at Mountain Lakes, which is a very similar size to us. They're spending $21,000 per student to our $14,500 per student. This is something new I added this year, because I was always just a little curious of what other districts are doing this year with their budget. So you can see where other districts are at. We do have a 2% cap, and you can go over that 2% cap, as you can see other districts are, for one of three reasons. If you have money that you were entitled to in the last 3 years you didn't use, you can use it towards your budget. If you have a growing enrollment and you qualify for an enrollment waiver, you can use it. Or if you have medical expenses that are extremely high, you qualify for a medical waiver. So some of these districts are using their waivers or their bank cap to go over that 2%. Every district has different needs, and there's reasons why they go over that 2%. Livingston is under the 2% this year, which is kind of uncommon. You don't typically see school districts. Again, it's based on their needs, though, and what they're doing within that district. Sometimes, I don't know if Livingston is preparing for a bond referendum, but when districts do, sometimes they'll come under that 2% cap to entice the voters. So as I mentioned, we do have 2% cap. As we start looking how this budget affects your taxes, we stayed at the 2% cap. We did qualify for roughly a $400,000 medical waiver this year. We are not using it. All right. The net result of not using it is us staying at the 2% cap. So when you're looking at an average assessed home in Glen Ridge, and that's the value of the average assessed home in Glen Ridge, we're increasing our operating budget roughly $177. Our debt service is increased, and that's partly because of the new bond referendum that was passed, $174. So you're seeing roughly $351 or $352 a year, which is about $29 a month. This all goes to making sure that we're running an efficient, effective school system. Some of the things that are in this budget that's important for us to remember. We are maintaining extra sections at Forest and Ridgewood Avenue. We're not cutting back staff in this budget. We're actually adding 2 additional staff members, a high school mathematics teacher and an assistant principal at the high school, whose main responsibility will be overseeing the middle school program, the 7th and 8th grade program. We are increasing instructional aids hours, so we're servicing the special ed students. We have that ability to service them a little bit better with increased hours with our aides. We are bringing our ESS, Effective School Solutions, that has run very effectively at the high school, and bringing it down to Ridgewood Avenue to help work with students who have greater emotional needs and mental health needs. We are upgrading our district security system. We're updating our social studies curriculum. We're adding 3 courses at the high school, AP Capstone, AP Chinese, and Poetry. And every building will have, we've planned some improvements to the facilities on top of the improvements we're making from the bond referendum. As I talk about how important our budget is, what's equally as important is the support we get from the community. We're not able to operate the school system without the support of a number of organizations in town and a number of private donors in town. That's what makes this community so special. I've always said the schools are the focus of the Glen Ridge community. And you can see that based on everything these organizations do from the school, from assemblies to funding professional development to supporting our athletic and arts programs. It's just very unique that we see this much support going on in a small town. And that's the presentation. I'm going to ask you guys to turn around before I get the first crack at questions.
That they doubled down on their efforts to try to find an alternative solution, which resulted in allowing us to keep all of those great things that the administration came up with in the budget, because that would have been the outcome. Either that we would have taken a waiver, increased the tax levy, or had to cut some of those additional benefits. And so we were able to maintain that. We thought it was important from a financial perspective in the same period that we just got the bond referendum, that we try to just maintain the cap of 2% increase without going over that. So I think it was a really great outcome for the district.
Other questions or comments from the board? Okay, we'll open it up for public questions and comments. This is the normal public comment period for agenda items only. So why don't we start with budget questions, and then after that we'll take any other agenda item questions. So, budget questions. Yes?
Lauren Johnson, South End of Glen Ridge. The data you have on the per student expenses, they're very low in Glen Ridge compared to other districts. Is there a specific reason why we're able to keep them so low? Is it that other districts have more programs, or is it we're more efficient at keeping our costs low? Like, is there a reason for why our per student expenses are lower compared to comparably sized districts in the area?
You want to take care of that?
Yeah, I'll, and you can correct me after.
All right.
I would say historically, the board has realized the burden on the residents of this town without having a big tax base as some of these other, you could drive down Verona's similar size, or even Cedar Grove, where they have a large either industry or business that takes up a large component of their the people who are contributing to their tax base. We have probably less than 10 stores in town. So understanding that and working up as best as they can to provide a quality education and the services needed, this town has done, this board has done a historic, excellent job of keeping that in consideration and budgeting when it comes to budgeting. I've been here, I believe, 23 years now, and I've seen how efficient it is. We're kind of unique in our setup as a school system. When you start looking at different administrative structure, we've kept that cost pretty low. So there's a lot that contributes to that.
I think we have fewer administrators than comparable districts. You know that at the end schools, we don't have assistant principals. We don't have department heads as they do at some schools. We don't have an assistant superintendent. We don't have any assistant superintendents. We don't have a human resources, an assistant superintendent for human resources. So compared even to districts that are comparable in size, we have a lean administrative structure, which of course means our administrators have to work more than 24/7. We have a lean administrative structure. We always try to think of how we can get the same or better results than other districts for less money. Our salary scale is not the highest, it is not the lowest. We try to keep our salary scale competitive so we can recruit and retain good teachers. But we, across the board, are always trying to do things efficiently. We do a lot of our maintenance projects in-house rather than contracting them out. That saves money, things like painting, putting tiles back on the walls of our disgusting bathrooms that will soon be redone. Things like that we do in-house. So it's a combination of things that makes our per pupil cost lower. But without our donor organizations, we would be much, much poorer educationally than we are.
Okay, thank you.
Because
Yes.
that number doesn't go into the per pupil cost, that's completely separate. All the graph and all the donations. I think, the board deserves some credit for it, but
It's the community.
The Home and School Association and graph makes possible things in this community that, you're not going to see in other towns, the other towns themselves.
Okay, I'm sorry.
In unit tipping, south part of Glenridge. To your point, I was just thinking maybe we can add a success measure for the students in addition to the cost. Maybe that will give a perspective. So I don't know if this is something you guys will think about or consider.
At a
I'm sorry,
what?
we didn't quite hear you.
The success measure for students, like park test scores, or anything that will indicate how the students are faring compared to the other schools.
Oh, scores.
Yeah, in the fall, we do a testing report that's a comparative to other districts and shows where our kids are, how they're performing. So that might be something you're interested in. It is online if you want to look at our testing report.
Yes, I guess I couldn't express myself.
No, I think I understand the intent of your question, perhaps. Those other towns that we compared ourselves with were not only selected on the basis of proximity, but also because I believe we perceive them as our peers, and that they're academically rigorous and students excel. So you'll see a mix of towns represented. That are both local and also perhaps broader to capture the ones that we consider the standouts here in New Jersey. Does that
Yes,
address your
that's
intent?
exactly
Yes.
what my point is, because as we know, the ultimate measure of success is the kids, and how we can kind of tie that together, to me, is the more of an indicator of how we are tracking.
Yeah, I'll call that value, right?
Yeah, value for the money, value for the tax dollars and for pupil expenditure, which I think is what we were talking about. So in terms of correlation between per pupil expenditure and scores, that depends on the district. But if you go to our website, the Glenridge website, is it under superintendent? The testing report is, I think you look on the left side of the main page for the testing report. Okay, Anthony, I saw your hand.
I wanted to ask about that slide that you created, Dirk, that had the different towns and their increases. And I wanted to know if you knew what the criteria that some of those towns use to go over their 2% cap, and how much, if any, of the money they get to go over is represented by state aid.
None.
None.
None. It's, your state aid is based on the state's determination of what percentage of the funding you're entitled to under the formula they can afford to give you.
That's why I asked the question, because you said,
But when they-
you're not getting the money based on the formula right now.
Right, we are underfunded according to the SBRA formula,
Right.
although we did get a bump this year, which sounded absolutely munificent. It was 10.5%, and it's about $89,000. So it's better than nothing, and we never send such things back to Trenton. But in terms of other districts and going over the cap, which is what you asked about, as Dirk said, they can get permission from the state and in the person of the executive county superintendent to go over the cap by certain amounts based on certain factors, like healthcare costs, like enrollment growth, above average enrollment growth. You have doing that, asking the state for that permission doesn't mean that you automatically do it. It gives the board the discretion to do it. And when you get a waiver of, say, we'll use a round number, you get a waiver of $100, the board can decide to use all of that $100 to go above the 200, to go above the 2%, or they can decide to use 50 of those dollars to go above the 2%. So it's at the board's discretion. You can do what we did, which is not use your available waivers at all to keep your tax levy lower.
So my question then, to your point, is where is that money? Where's that $100 coming from?
It comes from the taxpayers. When
Okay.
you go above the 2% tax levy cap, that just says you can raise the taxes more than the legal limit. So anytime a district goes above cap, like some of the ones that you saw, that means they are taxing people in excess of 2% more than the previous year. Yes?
To the point of state aid, just looking at the detailed budget in the packet, and I imagine a lot of this is just the vagaries of Trenton and how these things roll, but it's striking how the state aid is sorting into different buckets this year in particular. And I know that some of it, for instance, the security aid, that's money that's coming to them from the feds. But I found it curious that there was such an enormous jump in the transportation aid, and in particular the professional learning community and the, I guess maybe not surprising, park readiness aid was zeroed out altogether. Is there anything more that you can illuminate about? Is it something to do with our district, or is it something to do with
It really
It's
depends on the
mixed.
focus of either the federal government or the state government, and maybe you want to talk about that.
Yes, the state has many ways of disposing of money, and they do put it in different buckets. A few years ago, when they were giving minimal increases, they did put money into one category, which was the professional learning communities. It's a way, frankly, and this sounds like an exercise in cynicism, but it's a way of increasing money to some districts without increasing the aid distribution according to the formula. So it's a way, if you have a little money, you put it into a category like professional learning communities. Yeah, and some money does come from the feds, but all Fed money flows through the state. So, you know, there are different explanations for why money is in different categories. There's a category called adjustment aid, for example, that we don't get at all.
Yeah, I was just curious for our district.
I'm sorry?
I was just curious for our district doing well under something called categorical transportation aid, which you would think would benefit districts that have a lot of
Hopefully there's different buses, yes. So, Pete, can you explain that?
No,
No.
He's honest.
He can't
We
explain
do
it.
have a lot of transportation though. We have out-of-district tuition
Mhm.
students, so we have to transport them.
I was just noticing that it didn't seem to flow with the increase in,
No.
a commensurate increase in.
Personally, I think it's purely arbitrary that
That,
we've done,
I'm not surprised that I just was curious whether there,
you know.
okay.
So it has nothing to do with the fact we have no fleet of buses, but we do transport, as Pete said, out-of-district
Yeah.
placements, and also we pay
We have
aid
in-
in
we have
lieu of
in-district
transportation for private
transportation.
school students.
Okay.
Other questions? I saw some other hands. Where are those hands? People are afraid that we'll explain the school funding part. Any other questions? So I'm not looking in the right direction. Any questions from this side? Okay, if you think of something, we will have time again later. All right, we have reports this month, or right now, unless there's something that's time sensitive.
Do you want to, I think people think those are just, that was time for budget questions.
Oh, I'm sorry, we need the other question. Are there any questions, Mrs. Sala, for non-budget?
Yes, so it is related to Mr. Phillips' discussion about hiring earlier, and, you know, as usual, we be able to some retirements, and we could be able to add a few positions, and that seems to happen every year, to one degree or another, and I have been here the last few years, and somebody has always asked, usually more than once a year, about affirmative action and the fact that the school's administration and teaching staff does not represent the composition of the community as closely as some other schools. And every year, frankly, I mean, some people have brought you suggestions, hiring fairs, you know, this type of thing. And every year I hear that that's going to be looked at and addressed, and that you do have some kind of affirmative action on the website. But every year, the composition remains the same. And it seems to me that this year, we have several administrative openings, we certainly have teacher openings, and of course you want to go for the best qualified person, but we know there are many highly qualified people of all races and ethnic backgrounds. So how are we going to see that change?
There certainly are qualified people. When you say there are lots of them, or there are a large number, that is incorrect. There was an article in Education Week not too long ago about the nationwide shortage of teachers from minority groups, of all minority groups. And this is a concern. I've talked to our colleagues in districts that are more diverse, South Orange, Maplewood, Montclair. Almost every district is looking for an increase in the number of well-qualified minority candidates. I think that Dirk can talk about job fairs. You know, it is just the urban districts even are looking for the number of, to have the proportion of minority teachers that equals the proportion of minority group members in their student population. It is an ongoing battle for all schools. Now, job fairs, if we could certainly have a job fair, but when you only have, you speak about lots of openings, we're doing some retirement hires, we're doing two new positions, plus some retirement replacements, but compared to a bigger district, we don't do a lot of hiring. So to have a job fair here would really attract people. To piggyback on another district's job fair is an idea, but then sometimes you're competing for the same people, so other districts may not be receptive to that idea, and that's a little bit of a problem. Can you talk about job fairs a little bit?
Yeah, first, just to reiterate what you said about other districts having difficulties. It's actually a topic I met with 4 other superintendents about, and we were all under the same situation. We'd like to see more diversity in our teaching staff, and we had that discussion. And very similar to my experience, they're just not getting that in the candidates. There's just not a lot of diversity out there. As far as job fairs are concerned, we do get a lot of, typically we'll get a lot of applicants for our openings. We're an attractive district. Recently, Mike Donovan and I went to Montclair State's job fair. We haven't had a need to go to a job fair in quite some time. So, I'd say it's probably been close to 8 to 10 years since I went to a job fair, just because the need hasn't been there. But just trying to find a little diversity in the candidates. We made an effort to go up to Montclair State, and I will say it's one of the first things that we noticed. There wasn't a lot of diversity in that candidate pool, and we're probably seeing 200 to 300 individuals there looking for positions.
And I should say also we're having a looming teacher shortage across the board in New Jersey. The requirements for teachers, particularly student teacher requirements, have gotten more rigorous, making it more difficult for people who come from economically challenged backgrounds to even enter the teaching field. Student teaching, which used to be half a year, is now a full year. So teachers in general, it's really going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, a huge problem in New Jersey for everybody. That means that the pool of minority candidates is even smaller.
Just a follow-up, to clarify, the person brought to you information on minority education.
Sure.
Job fair, not suggesting our own job fair. Also, concerning the nationwide shortage of minority teachers, I'm sure what you say is true. I'd also like to point out, though, that if you average in certain areas that have very few minorities in the country and compare them to like New Jersey, you still have a bigger pool there, maybe inadequate, but there's more minorities there. Possibilities here. And I know that the Montclair district does have, again, it may not be a perfect percentage, but it does have teachers and administrators that are more reflective of their community. And I'm in the Newark Public Schools all the time because I'm CASA, work with special different children. And I will tell you, in the ones I am in, their teacher and administrative staff very much reflect their student population. I see that with my eyes, and there's some very good teachers and administrators there.
The pay scale is better. And for urban areas particularly, they can pay better. They also, one thing that the Education Week article pointed out was that for districts, some districts provide incentives. They provide help with housing. They provide, stipends for housing.
Education for teachers' children, they can attend from out of district here
If
free,
we,
right?
on a space available basis,
Right.
and we don't have a lot of space available. So the districts that succeed the best with minority and diversity hiring generally can afford to provide some inducements, housing help, other tuition, we give some tuition reimbursement, but more tuition reimbursement. There is a definite economic advantage to teaching particularly in districts like Newark, Camden, Trenton, et cetera. We unfortunately can't afford to give those kinds of help. It's just, you've seen our budget. So it is a concern of the board and will continue to be a concern of the board. The people that have come to us with suggestions have suggested things like specialty headhunters who specialize in recruiting diversity candidates, but that would be at a cost to the board. And so we have to, with our state aid numbers as they are, that's something we have to consider. But it is never far from our minds. And in fact, I had a conversation with a constituent this weekend.
Okay, just one more comment. It sounds like, though, there is no hope for change.
Oh, there's always hope for change.
Well, but if what we're doing doesn't work, then I guess we're gonna have to do something else, or it's gonna continue the same. And I'm just commenting after watching this for a couple of years now. I certainly hope we can see some change in the future, because our children should see a broad mix of racial, ethnic, and other types of diversity.
I think there is no one on this board who would disagree with you, and I think that we will see change. There is no such thing as hopeless, and education is not static. It isn't in any district that's good, and we are good. So it is always on our minds. If there were secret sauce, other superintendents getting together would figure it out. But it is an endemic problem, especially for districts that are as cash resource starved as we are. Other questions or comments? Yes.
Bernice
please.
Barnett. I can't not add to this discussion, clearly, with having two boys in a school district here. So I just want to add my own comment to this topic. I do think it's a topic that we really, really have to look at strongly. There's definitely a new superintendent in Montclair.
Yes, there is.
So I would encourage the board to really get to know her. She just came to our church on Sunday.
I've already reached out to her. As a matter of
Excellent.
fact.
To reach her, she's been an administrator in the Montclair district for a number of years, and obviously now is going to be the superintendent. I understand that, at Linden, Ms. Booknight is retiring, and I can't think of another teacher or administrator separate from Dr. Harris. And this district is continuing to change and to become more diverse and to reflect this country, which is a wonderful thing. But I think it's really important for our children of all races to have teachers and administrators also of varying races and backgrounds. It's really important.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay. As I was saying, and David, thank you. Does anyone have a committee or liaison report that is time sensitive? And I know all the home schools met tonight, so we'll have lots of reports next time. All right, we have some administrative items. Michael, would you give the administrative items?
Sure, I'll move A1 and 2.
Okay, may I have a second?
All second.
Thank you. These are both the investigations of KIB allegations. Does anyone have any comments or questions? All right, Pete, would you take the roll?
Mr. Campbell. Mr. DeLue. Mr. Keppel.
Aye.
Ms. Lang. Mr. Romano. Ms. St. Aubert. Dr. Yaros Ramos.
Aye.
Ms. Ginsburg.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Personnel items. David, would you move the personnel items?
I move P1 through P11, including supplemental P8.
Okay, may I have a second? Second from Alec. In keeping with our Board members, any reservations about any personnel item? All right, Pete, would you call the roll?
Mr. Campbell. Mr. DeLue. Mr. Keppel.
Aye.
Ms. Lang. Mr. Romano. Ms. St. Aubern.
Aye.
Dr. Yaros Ramos.
Aye.
Ms. Ginsburg. Motion carries.
Okay, Michael, Rachel, all
Yes, I move C1 through C3.
right, can I have a second? Second from Heather. Any questions or comments from board members before we take a vote? Okay, Pete, would you call the roll?
Mr. Campbell. Mr. DeLue. Mr. Keppel.
Aye.
Ms. Lang. Mr. Romano. Ms. St. Aubern. Dr. Yaros Ramos.
Aye.
Ms. Ginsburg.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, before we move to business items, I would draw your attention to B5. On the recommendation of the superintendent, accept with thanks the generous donation of boosters for the Abilities Fair from Forest Avenue Home and School for Forest Avenue School. So thank you, Forest Avenue. And now, Tim, would you move to business items?
Yes, I move B1 through B13.
Okay. Questions or comments from the board?
Second.
Second by Tom. Sorry. Questions or comments from the board?
I just want to draw the public's attention to items B12 and B13. So this is the bids for the bathrooms in the district that is part of the referendum project. And we were fortunate enough to get bids that came in very close together, competitive, and then collectively fell just below our budget. And one of the things that we as a finance committee and board that we're concerned about is a lot of these budgets were created, some time ago when we're going through the scoping process and everything. So every year, depending on how the market hardens for construction in New Jersey, those budgets can get out of date. And now we're looking at a hardening market and some escalation of prices. So I think we're pleased that one of the big projects that we first got is going to be under budget.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board? Pete, would you call the roll?
Mr. Campbell. Mr. DeLue. Mr. Keppel.
Aye.
Ms. Lang.
Aye.
Mr. Romano. Ms. St. Aubern.
Aye.
Dr. Yaros Ramos.
Aye.
Ms. Ginsburg.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, we come to the second public comment period for comments or questions on agenda or other items. Any questions or comments? Yes, Mrs. Sullivan.
Yes. I know you all have announced about the acquisition of the central school,
Yes.
and we all agreed that additional space was needed, one way or another. And that part of the reason we were told that we needed to go with the larger option of the central school rather than look at adding on to existing schools perhaps, was that the school population may increase more than we thought due to the building of apartments. And now I'm hearing that that plot of land may not even be apartments, it might be medical buildings, is that correct? Are you aware of that?
No, the medical office building is the one that we're aware of is the one across from that side.
Okay.
I do know the council was considering, I don't know if they passed it or not, making that area on Baldwin Street an area in need of redevelopment, which is part of their ongoing negotiations for that property, but no, I had not heard that. I think that there has been an ongoing, not battle, but negotiation between the town and the developer that has led to the diminution in the number of apartments on that property. But I had not heard that there was any other use for it. Has anyone else on the board heard that? So I think, I don't know where that came from, but I have not heard that, and I'll certainly follow up with the council, but I had not heard it.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing the follow-up. That'd be great.
No, I haven't heard it. Last I heard was 98 units, and they've also boarded all the windows on those
Oh, I
houses
know.
on Baldwin Street. So I presume that means that either they encouraged them that they needed to do that, or that maybe it's moved forward a little bit, but I don't think that medical office space, I don't think Mountainside would be in favor of it because they're supporting the development across the street from them. So,
It's out there though, from a fairly reliable source, but it's under consideration. I'm not saying you're doing it, I'm just asking for more.
sure, no, I will ask. Any other questions or comments? Okay, if that is the case, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion?
May I have a second? Second. Okay. Thank you all.